Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. When something really matters, it elicits emotion. And how do we help people communicate emotion to make life better? Whether at home, at work, for your customers, for your kids at school. Our challenge at the MIT Media Lab and at Affective has been to come up with better ways to measure and help people communicate emotion. I'll start with an example that we did years ago, which was a skin conductance sensor that we gave to an audience like you, worn on the palm of the hand, and it glowed brightly every time the audience got excited, every time they were engaged. We learned a lot that day. We learned, for example, that every time a new speaker came out on stage, the audience glowed. Every time there was a live demonstration, whether it worked or not, the audience glowed. Every time there was live Q&A or laughter, the audience glowed. But unfortunately, every single time there was a PowerPoint presentation, there was a decaying exponential in brightness. Let's look more closely at an example of the signal changing. Here for a 9-year-old boy watching a movie trailer. The signal will go up about a second after each of the parts of the trailer that cause him to engage, starting with the music. The 3 biggest peaks. The engagement kind of falls off here, though.
Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Squeak Wolves. Christmas Day.
He peaks for the name of the movie and the date of it. So you can see why people in market research and advertising are extremely interested in this information. Or I, as an educator, I'm extremely interested too, because I want to know what content is connecting with my students and with my loved ones. Here's an example of the signal changing with a Patriots fan back when the Patriots were in the Super Bowl. And this one illustrates an important point about skin conductance, and that is even as we measure the autonomic arousal of a person and their excitement, this goes up with things that are good or bad. So we see it go up here when the guy has, when his favorite team scores a touchdown. It also goes up during an end zone overthrow. So it goes up with good and bad. Interestingly, it also goes up during a Doritos Mouse TV commercial where the mouse comes out and catches the man. It's interesting now that we can get this information in real life to see how relatively important different events are in life and where the significance of something that you share with somebody compares with this response to some other things that are going on with their life. What drives this signal? The skin conductance is driven by the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system response. Your autonomic nervous system has 2 main branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic can be thought of kind of like stepping on the gas in the car. It revs your heart up. It causes the skin conductance to increase. The parasympathetic causes the heart to decrease. Sympathetic is thought of as fight or flight, parasympathetic as rest and digest. Almost all the organs are innervated by both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, except the skin, which gets the pure sympathetic, which makes it ideal for us measuring this fight or flight response. Now, I became interested in measuring this response when I started working a lot with people on the autism spectrum who are non-speaking. The most heartbreaking stories that I hear from these, from the families and individuals themselves when they later acquire the ability to speak, is that the changes that were worst were when they got kicked out of school or shipped off to an institution, removed from learning opportunities and social opportunities. What caused that to happen? Usually it was a meltdown or a series of meltdowns. And the meltdowns, like adult tantrums, appear to come from nowhere. One moment the person seemed calm and relaxed. The next moment they might have become injurious to themselves or others. So they seem very unpredictable and uncontrollable. Now, as we undertook the privilege of getting to know some individuals who could later communicate, they told us that these meltdowns never came from nowhere, that in fact that they were always preceded by increasing stress and frustration. They couldn't understand why people couldn't see what was bugging them. So this made me think, wow, what if we could enable them, even though they can't communicate, to signal out their increasing stress and frustration? But to do that required a device that is shown on the left here, a classic galvanic skin response, skin conductance, sympathetic nervous system measure that involved a lot of wires and boxes that was uncomfortable to wear in daily life. So my team at MIT went through lots of iterations until we came up with a device that could be worn robustly on the wrist and gather data in real life. This has just been commercialized by Affective, and I'm pleased to say is finally available as a product for people to gather and communicate this information in the real world outside the lab. Here's the first example of 7 days of data that I saw from a student at MIT wearing the skin conductance sensor on his wrist. And the first thing that jumped out here was there's a lot of studying, and it's very activating. Studying and lab work, in fact, sort of to the discouragement of we professors, is much more arousing than any of the classroom activity. We also saw these huge peaks that were happening during sleep, which puzzled us in the first place. We just expected sleep to be flat. Generally, as we did further polysomnography and teamed up with some expert sleep research on this, we found that these peaks tend to occur during slow wave sleep or deep sleep. And we're now looking at the relation of those to sleep quality and memory and learning. Here's an example of a girl on the autism spectrum where she's able to communicate out her arousal level using this sensor. Here she's wearing it, one on each ankle, so you'll see two signals streaming across the bottom. And she's wearing it while she's undergoing an ordinary occupational therapy session.
Hold on to the strings.
This is 45 minutes of an ordinary session here. And you'll see, it peaked here. She had a little bit of a meltdown here, got in a ball pit, calmed down, peaked here, calmed down. What you see up here in blue is right now, this window here. The right edge is what you're seeing in the video. And we see that it peaked as she climbed on this swing, but as she starts swinging, as that rhythmic activity kicks in, it has this nice decaying exponential. We see for many people on the autism spectrum when they rock or do these repetitive movements that can be very calming for them. They're not just doing that to be difficult or something. It can have a very important regulatory effect. In fact, I've noticed an increasing number of rocking chairs cropping up in airports since 9/11, and they're almost always taken, at least at Boston Logan. I think that's a healthy sign. Once you get the ability to make a new measure in the real world and have people wear it unobtrusively in daily life, you learn a lot of things that are surprising. And this was a really special surprise we ran into. One of our kids on the autism spectrum was wearing this over Christmas. And I was looking at the data and I saw this enormous peak on one side, not the other side. I thought, oh dear, something's going wrong with the sensor. And I looked more closely and it looked like it was fine before the peak and after. I asked his brother, any idea what could have happened here? And he said, I was with him. He had a seizure right after. Wow, I got on the phone with Joe Madsen, Boston Children's Hospital. Is there any way somebody could have a huge autonomic surge on one side of the body with a big seizure? He said yes. Fast forward about 8,000 hours of data and extensive analysis led by my student Mingzer Po for his doctoral work, and we have now shown that measuring signals from the wrist reflects signals measured from the brain. When the seizures are labeled by the epileptologist reading the EEG only, they coincide exactly with these peaks measured just from this electrical signal from the surface of the skin on the wrist. So this was really mind-blowing to me that a change in our brain could show up as these events picked up through a simple wristband. We're hoping this now can lead to better detection and treatment in real time of people who suffer from seizures. Of the seizure events themselves. Now, another thing that kind of surprised me in doing this was the events show up sometimes on just one side. Usually the two sides are showing the same information. We were just measuring two sides for redundancy to cancel noise. But we found that we learned something that was already in the literature, that the right hemisphere of the brain controls the electrodermal activity of the right palmar surface and the left the left. I sort of rediscovered this when a tragic event happened in my family. I lost a loved one. And that day I was at work having trouble speaking. And those who know me know I never have trouble speaking. So one of my colleagues, Ron El-Kalyubi, said, put a sensor on both sides. I'm strongly right-handed, and sure enough, the left side was incredibly suppressed. That night, I was sitting in the kitchen in this total stupor, just kind of stirring a pot of something. And one of my sons came up and started rubbing my back, which I felt really blessed. This is a very special moment. I almost felt hope restored. And then his little brother came up and did the same thing to him. And I had one of those rare moments of parental bliss, you know, where you kind of tingle down to your toes, especially as a mom of sons. And at that moment, my little one looks up at the display in the kitchen, because of course I'm streaming my data wirelessly to this monitor. And he says, "Mommy, your line's crossed." My right signal that was way above my left had come together during that moment of parental bliss. Now, I thought, wow, you know, I've heard about positive, negative stuff in the brain, you know, might show up, but I never thought this could show up on the wrist. Now, that's just a few data points, but I monitored myself over time with the sleep, and sure enough, the signal as I recovered went back to the normal sort of switching left and right. Now, this is just a few data points, but it shows that there's this whole new potential to explore what's going on in the brain, even by measuring some of these peripheral signals downstream. There are many positive moments as well that people have shared with us using our emotion technology. Here's one from a bride in India who naturally was sort of stressed out before her wedding. We see lots of peaks. Her friend loved seeing this part where she was chilling with her friends and they helped calm her down before. And then the 4 major peaks here during the wedding ceremony. The first, where the vows were exchanged. The second, third, and fourth in the Hindu ceremony, where the bride and groom exchange symbolic gestures that they are now husband and wife. Here's an example where a mother and a daughter wanted to share the daughter's experience at school. The daughter had her first big concert in front of school that day. She was playing the harp and singing in front of the entire school, and she expected it would be kind of peaked there, and it was. Also, it was very peaked during physical education, to be expected. Anything that gives physical exertion, makes you sweat, can be very arousing. Her mom was very disappointed to see that math lessons was the low point of the day. But there was this other huge peak there between reading and PE, and what was that? Turned out the daughter had a talk with her mom later that day. In fact, as she recalled this experience, we see the emotions coming back up again. That this was this horrible bullying event that she was being dragged into by her friend. Wouldn't it be amazing if the people we care most about were given the opportunity to share in an externalized way some of what was going on in their day that was so difficult? Whether they can speak or not, this can be a powerful way to take your emotions outside of you and begin to reflect on them and share them with others. I have one last example with the skin conductance sensor, a personal one. I discovered one day while taking my son on a birthday outing to Six Flags that I indeed had big peaks with the roller coasters, which I love, and a really awful one with a ride that I won't tell you about that was very unpleasant. But the surprise to me when I looked at the data at the end of the day was not that I have this huge peak when I'm on the fastest, highest, most intense roller coaster in all of New England, but it was actually earlier in the day when we were just trying to get out the door. Many people on the autism spectrum who are conversant tell us that they have difficulty reading facial expressions. They are trying to pay attention to what you're saying, and at the same time, they can't tell if you're looking pleased or displeased, interested or bored. In particular, many of them have asked us if we could please help them to have some technology that tells them if the person they're speaking with is still interested or if they're boring them. So this next example is a short video clip introducing my collaborator on this work, Dr. Rana El-Kalyoubi, who's my also co-founder at Affective and the chief architect of our face reading software.
Which would be recording your facial expressions and analyzing it in real time. So we use 24 feature points on the face, like the eyes, mouth, eyebrows, and we use those to recognize facial expressions like a smile, a lip pucker, an eyebrow raise, and a mouth open, and so on. And we look at these over time, and we sort of use them along with head gestures to make a guess at your hidden mental state.
Problems that the character has never thought in their life but are sort of ever present. And then you have backstory, which is sort of the the history of the character.
Each person is
that
wearing a camera
explains
pointed at their own
why
face,
they have
opt-in.
this dread and why they have these issues that are unresolved. So you've got fears, emotions, issues, and backstory. That's sort of the inner part of the onion. Then you get to sort of the cognitive layers, which are beliefs, which you don't normally think of beliefs as.
All right, using this technology, there are many things we can recognize and many things we can learn. For example, I learned that actually I was quite interested in what he had to say, but I started to look disinterested because he never paused. He never gave me a chance to go into thinking mode, process the information, and return, or when I did, he had moved on and I was lost. So as we do this fine-grained measurement of emotion, we learn a lot of things about how to improve our interactions with one another, or how to improve our interactions online or elsewhere in the world. Here is just an example reminding us that while emotion is about what matters most, it's also communicated in this complicated language that is nonverbal. In order to get a computer to learn how to read this, we have to solve an extraordinarily complex problem that makes chess and Go look trivial in comparison. With over 10,000 facial expressions that can be communicated and change every second, multiplied by the faces participating in a conversation, the social emotional games people play is probably the hardest computer problem to solve, computer science problem to solve in the next century as we go forth. The complexity is just astronomical. What we are starting to work on at MIT in partnership with Affective in this next project is a way to go online to get right now thousands and hopefully before long millions of examples of natural facial expressions while they happen online. Here's an example where we partnered with an interactive task on Forbes. You can go to Forbes.com and try this out. You click on one of the TV commercials. These are designed to elicit delight. And we measure your smiles, and we show the results here for one of the commercials for three groups of people: those who say they have seen the video many times, those who have seen it once or twice, and those who say this is their first time. This should be playing, but for some reason it's not playing. Clicking. And what will happen when they get there and play this video is you'll see the video synchronized with the peaks on the graph. You can go online and see this if they can't get it working here. If you go to Forbes.com and search for interactive smile, it will show you, you can participate, give our researchers your facial expression data. You can also see the results and see interesting things like, do people smile where you smile if you smile at the dog? Or do people, one thing we learned is that people who have seen it before smile much earlier in anticipation, and they also smiled a lot more. And for these popular videos that they liked. I seem to have lost my slides completely here. I will wrap up and just tell you that whether the emotions are online or in real life, whether they're to help somebody who's speaking or non-speaking, or just to capture some of those most positive emotions, moments in life, new technology is enabling people to communicate emotion in ways never before possible. I'd love to hear from you how this technology could help improve lives for you, your business, your customers, and your loved ones. Thank you.